Secret Invasion for me was one of Marvel's final chances at redemption to make me really respect them for quality projects. The upcoming roster really isn't inspiring, and this was the one series that had high potential. However, their attempt here at a suspense-driven show submerged in terrifying and eerie paranoia completely missed the mark. And what we got was a mundane spy thriller that feels so dull that it will easily be forgotten within a few months. So let's go into the first main flaw of the series, in that the creators fundamentally failed to deliver on the premise of the show. And that's absolutely damning in my opinion. Secret Invasion has such a great premise in that anyone can be a hidden Skrull, and the fact that that is barely utilized feels terrible. The creators rarely stage a scene in which we are actively guessing as to who the Skrulls are, because they make it very obvious. I would point out that I love the paranoia of the first scene, in which Everett Ross turned out to actually be a Skrull. However, for some idiotic reason, the writers blunder the reveal by showing Everett preparing a gun for the meeting, signaling that something is wrong and he is most likely a Skrull. Imagine if this moment was removed and it was just a meeting with this crazy guy, explaining the exact premise of the show. Then our perception wouldn't be compromised because we're in the safety of a recognizable protagonist. This isn't the case, so there is no suspense in this scene as we wait for Everett to reveal himself. Even with Rhodey, there's a brief duration in which we don't know if he's a Skrull, and then literally an episode later, they reveal in the most boring way possible that he is one. And then that's basically it. They never utilize the aspect of paranoia, and the mass sense of infiltration feels empty, because barely any of the characters we know have been impacted. Just some random government officials we've never seen before. This is where I think the scale of the show really hinders the premise, because the implications of this mass takeover imply that there should even be some Avengers who have been compromised. That's how it's initially revealed in the comics, where one of the heroes dies in an Avengers battle, and then they suddenly turn into a Skrull, which is an insane twist because it comes out of nowhere and hurdles our characters into a major conflict that blindsided them. This is where the actual paranoia plays up, because there's a massive roster of characters who could be compromised. For the show, the scale is basically microscopic in comparison, and for the Skrull reveal, Talos kind of just nonchalantly tells Nick Fury what's happening. The creators try this major oh shit reveal with Everett, but A, he's a very minor character, and B, they botch the reveal anyways. Secret Invasion desperately needed a larger scale to properly communicate the threat of the Skrulls, because they're primarily tied to affecting characters, and by barely having any, it lacks impact. By including a bunch of no-face government characters in the show that are supposed to impose danger in the story, it flat out doesn't work because the audience doesn't have any prior attachment to them. In worst case scenario, you could introduce some new reoccurring characters who have more importance within the story to be later revealed as Skrulls. But the writers don't do that, and we only briefly see a few Skrulls in high positions of power, and their influence is never communicated because we don't see their impact. All they do is vote on making Gravik their leader, and then their relevance to the story evaporates. It's pretty crazy that Captain America Winter Soldier is infinitely more tense and paranoia-fueled than literally a global alien invasion of shapeshifters. Because another major thing that Secret Invasion lacks is mystery. If you look at Winter Soldier, almost every scene within the first act pushes you further down this unknown rabbit hole. It begins with Nick Fury not telling Steve about a secret objective, then a sudden assassination attempt on Nick, to a reveal of an unknown and intimidating assassin, and then finally, another fatal assassination attempt on Nick Fury. All of these scenes create a great sense of intrigue and keeps the audience captivated, along with the stakes being really high because of the precedent set and that Nick Fury was snuffed out so easily. Then the reveal that S.H.I.E.L.D. is actually Hydra through the elevator scene is amazing, and the rest of the movie is obviously great from there. Now, Secret Invasion on the other hand has none of that. At no point in the story are you ever curious as to what Gravik is up to, because for some reason, the creators want to keep showing us his perspective. Very early on, Gravik simply just tells the audience what his goal is, and right away, it robs the villain of any mystery. He's essentially laid out to bear, and any future conflict is very dull because we know exactly how it's going to play out. If you're going to have a mysterious alien organization, then never pull back the curtain to show us what they're up to. It only damages their brand. Along with that conflict being the generic World War III plot, which this pretty much goes into the next major flaw in that the conflict is very dumb and uninspired. What would be a much more engaging plot that would also utilize the premise much better would be a full Skrull takeover in positions of power. Hell, they're already making their way to that possibility, so I don't know why they're drawing so much attention to themselves by trying to start World War III and wipe out the whole planet. It genuinely feels counterproductive, and if they were more patient, then maybe they would have succeeded. But the reason why a full Skrull takeover would be a much better conflict would be because it's significantly more mysterious. Nick Fury would have to solve the intricate puzzle of which high officials aren't who they say they are. From here, you could create a story that's deeply planted within espionage, paranoia, backstabbing, and conspiracy, instead of one that is much more action-oriented. It feels like Disney required the creators to include action into almost every episode, but it inherently doesn't suit the show that well and clearly doesn't play into its strengths. There's only a couple instances in the entire show in which a character discovers the identity of a high-ranking official, but even one of them was done off-screen. If anything, by not including this at all, it feels like a lazy attempt at adapting a secret invasion story. Because on one hand, it's much easier to write a superficial story about another ham-fisted World War III attempt with another angry villain wanting vengeance than it is a complex spy mystery requiring wit and intelligence to overcome conflict. Like, imagine if Talos got a tip that one of 5 government officials in the US were a Skrull, and then Nick Fury was tasked with finding out which one it was. Maybe it could be presented as a dinner scene between the 6 of them, and the audience would also get to play along with deducing who the imposter is. That kind of example is infinitely more engaging and intriguing to me than whatever bland action we ended up getting. And imagine if Nick Fury chooses incorrectly and accidentally kills a human. That would be an interesting twist for one of the opening episodes, as we realize how hard it is to figure out who a Skrull is. And this is why it saddens me so much that the writers spoon-fed us who the Skrulls are in the show, and never tried to perplex us. So I'd gladly swap out the poorly executed, unimpressive, and boring action for a gritty, intelligent, and captivating mystery any day of the week. Then there's also the aspect as to how painfully stupid graphics plans were throughout the show. Firstly, Skrulls in general are able to feel empathy as portrayed through Talos and other Skrull characters. So therefore, there's probably a decent amount of Skrulls who aren't just okay with obliterating billions of people just so that they can live in their own skin. I feel like it unrealistically expects too much from their species to be completely okay with full-on genocide. So to me, the fact that a lot of Skrulls were okay with this was pretty surprising to say the least. Like, they had a pretty big following within this compound. Fury was initially very inviting and accepting of the Skrulls, so I think they should inherently be extremely thankful, along with them being the ones to bring the entire population to Earth without asking the permission of Fury during the blip. Also, the whole point in which Fury hasn't found a planet for the Skrulls, I find a little ridiculous. Surely at some point he could have asked Carol Danvers to fly around the universe to easily find a planet for them to inhabit, or even the planet that Thanos was on that seemed barren of life and was great to live on. So the fact that there are literally no planets out there for the Skrulls seems contrived to make this conflict even work in the first place. Along with the writers not really communicating why the Skrulls hate not living in their own skin, when most of them seem fine doing so anyways. Like, I understand they want that freedom, but at the cost of wiping out all life on the planet seems absurd. Another big point in the story that completely confused me was Gravik working with Skrulls that could easily be turned to the other side because of their biased allegiances, like Talos' daughter Gaia and Fury's wife Priscilla. Why would he ever work with them in the first place if there is even the smallest of possibilities that they are actually a double agent? It seems like Gravik is risking a lot by allowing them in on his plans, and unsurprisingly, they both betray him. Because of this, the protagonist gets spoon-fed a lot of free information and can easily solve a lot of the conflict. Like, 2 of the major attacks were revealed by Gaia, and Fury found out the identity of Rhodey from his wife. If Gravik never worked with either of them, then he wouldn't have handed over such an easy advantage to his adversary. It honestly just feels like he's constantly throwing despite him quote-unquote being multiple steps ahead of Nick Fury. So I find it hard to believe how a character can be simultaneously so smart while also being so stupid. Then there's the whole aspect where Gravik was able to capture Rhodey, a top-ranking US military official who's also an Avenger, but yet struggles to capture the president? Couldn't he just arrange a private meeting between him and Rhodey and then swap the president in that way, instead of doing an all-out assault on the president that ended up failing to make it seem like Russia was attacking them? It feels like the answer to his problem is staring him right in the face by grabbing one of the most powerful figures in the world to then initiate World War III, but doesn't because of reasons? Maybe it would make launching nukes too easy and he just wanted to challenge himself, I don't know. Or even if it wasn't possible to get the president right away, slowly work your way through the White House and replace most of them with Skrulls, eventually getting to the president. But again, this would be a plot that is devoid of action, and it seems like that is something Disney wanted to desperately interject to make the show more marketable. There are definitely more logical issues that I can go into, but I think I made the point that it's mostly illogical and the conflict never feels validated and realistic. Because of this, it also makes the conflict very boring to me because the characters are rarely challenged mentally, and the supposed arc that Nick Fury goes on and his quote-unquote return to form feels superficial. Speaking of Nick Fury, I think the show fundamentally takes away from the character's intrigue and cool factor by putting a spotlight on him, which this is just the nature of the show and by having him be the lead protagonist of this story arc. Nick Fury is a mysterious and badass figure who is always multiple steps ahead and is playing 4D chess in the background at all times. By revealing this and it being underwhelming as to what we saw, I think it hurts what we perceived was peak Nick Fury. The very thought of what Nick Fury was up to behind the scenes was better left vague because it allowed the audience to fill in the blanks with heroic and intelligent assumptions as to what he was doing. But in the show, very rarely is he ever doing something clever, and even his dialogue scenes don't come across as being that intelligent, which again, I think is an utter failure from the writers. Only a few times throughout the whole show does Nick Fury actually use spycraft. A couple times when he planted listening devices, and one brief time he wore a disguise. That's all the spy-related stuff the show gave us? Secret Invasion also coincides with Nick Fury getting his groove back, but the writers didn't do a good enough job to sell me on his arc. He just becomes slightly more competent by the end of the show, and if anything, it pulls up the curtain as to what made Nick Fury so powerful to begin with, which was his Skrull spy network. The show essentially states that Fury would be nothing without them, and all his power came from them and not from himself. And that really sucks to learn as someone who loved the idea of who Nick Fury was as a character. Also, the whole Skrull spy network raises some logical inconsistencies, like his Skrulls never discovering that Hydra existed in S.H.I.E.L.D. due to them being able to impersonate anyone there, but applying this new story revelation to past events would shatter all logic, so I won't go down that path. The only thing that really builds Nick Fury's character is his relationship with his wife, in which we see a more compassionate side to him. Some of their scenes together were interesting, like why Nick decided to stay on the space station for so long, neglecting his wife. But the romantic side of Nick Fury isn't what draws me to him, and instead it's the espionage aspect. So the fact that we barely get any of that and get way more of whatever this is feels misguided. Who the hell was asking for an interspecies relationship and Secret Invasion? All I wanted was Fury outsmarting his opponents, and even though that finally happens at the end of the show, it only happens because Graphic is yet again a dumbass. You're telling me that you fully understand Nick Fury and are multiple steps ahead of him, but yet you think he'll just waltz into your radiation-ridden compounds without taking any radiation blocker pills, or whatever those are? You think he's just going to hand over the Avengers DNA vial, which is dumb enough itself, and just let you walk away with it? Also, as a side note, the whole DNA vial thing giving Guy and Graphic every power is so dumb. I don't think the writers understand some hero powers like magic being something that you learn and isn't tied to DNA. Also, someone's rings are definitely DNA related. But going back to the final climax, the fact that Graphic easily allows himself to be bested by Fury's plan completely invalidates Fury's arc in my opinion, because it should not have worked. It gives him a false victory and should have required a much smarter plan from Fury. Graphic knows that Guy is on Fury's side, so the fact that he doesn't even check to see if that's really Fury is extremely stupid. Especially since he activates the machine while Fury is in it. He's literally a Skrull, and the concept of being deceived by another one of his kind is apparently non-existent to him. But yeah, from a character perspective, the show both damages the mystique of Nick Fury's character while not filling in anything good within the blanks, and his arc isn't deep enough. Another issue that stems from this that could have given Fury more of a chance to grow is a supporting cast that gets killed off too quickly. Maria Hill is pretty close to Fury, and I wouldn't have minded the writers to explore her character more while also pairing her up with Fury. Because by a certain point in the show, Fury has no more characters close to him, so there's no one for him to interact with on a personal level. Maria Hill was that character, but the writers instantly killed her in the first episode. Initially, I admired the balls of the writers for doing this, and it established the show as having some high stakes by killing a recognizable character early on. But that was really the only impact the show had, honestly. Talos also dies, but given that the Skrull arc is essentially resolved by the end of the show, he doesn't have much place within the story anymore, so his exit was fine. However, looking back at Maria Hill's death with more retrospection, it actually feels like a cheap way to instill danger into a show that fundamentally lacks it. I think the MCU, given that they're expanding into different regions like the multiverse, had no place for Maria Hill, so they opted to just kill her off for quick shock value. What would have been better to me would have been to build her up more, establish the dynamic between her and Fury, and then if you really want to have her die, have it happen towards the end of the show to motivate Nick Fury even more. Or you could have her die in Talos' place for all I care, because his death scene was so underwhelming. By keeping around Maria Hill, it gives more opportunities for dialogue scenes and for Nick Fury to interact with more characters and grow. In the first episode, Jay directly calls out Fury for not being ready for this challenge and doubts his ability. Having this personal conflict with a character that's also close to him should have been explored more because it gives Fury an outlet to speak his unfiltered mind. Or maybe it would have been even crazier to have Maria Hill actually turn out to be a Skrull double agent. That would be a huge reveal that would blindside Fury and force him to reevaluate everything. So out of those options, I would have much preferred the Maria secretly being a Skrull option being revealed later on in the story, instead of instantly killing her off without giving her any chance to become an actual character. For the final portion of the video, I'll quickly touch on some additional poor aspects that made the show even worse to me. Firstly, the cinematography was very flat and flavorless throughout, and it looked very cheap. I don't know where the hell the over $200 million budget of the show went, and at this point, I assume it primarily went to Samuel L. Jackson's salary, because every set piece is set in dull locations, and visually, it's one of the most forgettable shows. The final climax literally takes place in an ugly scrapyard. If you were to compare this with Loki, which is a completely different show, you can already tell the cinematography is much more impressive from a composition, color, lighting, and depth standpoint. Then the editing for certain action scenes was sloppy and at times very jarring. The opening foot chase with Everett felt like such an amateur production that I was surprised we were watching such a high-budget show. Another major issue that a lot of people have complained about is the sluggish pace. On one hand, this kind of show needs a slow pace, but on the other, since there's never any mystery or intrigue throughout the whole show, it just left the audience bored for most of it. Episodes would generally build towards an action scene, but again, that conflict feels completely misplaced for this kind of show, and we weren't here for the action. I want tense dialogue scenes with suspense and the objective of finding out who the Skrulls are, and then the occasional bursts of action. Also, we have a lot of scenes that feel largely unnecessary, in which we see the perspective of Graphic and Gaia. Since Gaia becomes an important character later on, we do kind of need these scenes for her character, but since barely anything is happening in them, and she's primarily spectating most of the time anyways, it obliterates the pace. Along with it also further damaging the mysterious nature of their organization because we always know what they're up to. There's also a whole little subplot where Gaia hangs out with Priscilla where they repel a kill squad and also have a funeral for Talos. During this entire time, I could honestly care less because it both had nothing to do with the main plot and it didn't host a main character. That and the whole kill squad conflict is really contrived because Priscilla would rather die in her home than go into hiding. She says that they'll get her regardless, but that negates the entire point of going into hiding. So yeah, overall, there's a lot of unnecessary bloat within the show, which sucks because it already has a somewhat short runtime. I assumed each episode would be almost an hour, but the last few episodes were barely 30 minutes once you subtract the recap, the 2-minute title sequence, and the really long end credits. Secret Invasion just has so much wrong with it to the point where I think it's a complete failure. They decide to fumble such a riveting story within the source material and use it as an excuse to just give Nick Fury his own show. And And in the process, I think that actually destroys it because the story requires a much bigger scale for it to succeed. It's possible for it to work under the current conditions, maybe, but the writing and production quality are flat out bad and tank what little chance the show had to begin with. Thank you for watching, and by the way, I have a Patreon since I've been demonetized for the last few months. Any support would be greatly appreciated, and I also have a new Discord channel as well, which all the links are in the description. Let me know in the comments what you thought about Secret Invasion, and have a great day.